Technocracy historically was started at Columbia University in 1932. There was lots of talk about it before that, by the way, but they got underway kind of officially at Columbia University. That was the liberal think tank, progressive think tank at that time. And they were scientists and engineers who decided that capitalism was dead. That's thanks to the Great Depression of 1932. They're right in the middle of it. And they believed that it was up to them somehow to create a brand new economic system and have it at the ready for when capitalism died. Mm-hmm. And they fully believed that it would, and they would just step in and say, hey, we've saved the day. We have a scientific solution. Just like technocrats today, by the way. Got a problem? Hey, we got formulas, we got algorithms, we got genetic engineering, we got chemicals, we got this, that, and the other.
Yeah. On that note, Patrick, just while you're saying technocrats, that is such a common word in the world, but nobody in America knows about it. So you're talking about something that was started in 1930s in the U.S., and it's not really talked about now, but people are still talking, and the theory and the idea is still going strong in other parts of the world.
Right, it is, and it's it's very chic to talk about technocracy in Europe right now, mm-hmm. and they use the word technocrat almost everywhere, every day. Mm-hmm. They do in China as well, in India, and Japan, especially Japan, South Korea, totally a technocracy at this point. But the idea of technocracy was social engineering. As a resource-based economic system, they wanted to control all the resources, and they wanted to control all the consumption. That is what sustainable development is, by the way. Mm-hmm. So their doctrine or dogma, whatever, did away with private property. They didn't want anything to do with private property whatsoever. So people don't need to own anything to be happy. We will provide them with what they need, cradle to grave. Well, cradle to cradle, I guess. But we'll give them everything they need. It's a lot like the book Brave New World, I have to say. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, Brave New World, yeah, written by Aldous Huxley, a Brit, part of a nefarious family that was into all kinds of things, including eugenics and the first Earth Charter and the second Earth Charter and so on. The Huxleys were just an amazingly, they're like the Rockefellers to finance, but they were to progressivism. Mm-hmm. He saw technocracy in the early 1930s and said, you know, I'm going to write a book about that. I'm inspired. And he wrote the book, Brave New World. It's a scientific dictatorship. Everything was micromanaged. Everything was micromanaged. You were told what you could do, what you couldn't do, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat, what you could make, what you couldn't make. And that was it. And they told you how your family unit would be structured. You know, they did away in the book now. They did away with marriage and concepts like love and attraction and commitment. And they set up a society where all the babies were incubated in laboratories, and men and women had to have free sex with anybody they wanted to have it with. And there was no relationships whatsoever. If you fell in love with somebody, you'd be punished, or well, you'd be taken away and re-educated. This was a scientific dictatorship. And this really is what technocracies will result in the end. It was rejected in America by the end of the 1940s because capitalism didn't die after all. World War II resuscitated capitalism, and there was no need for people to be after capitalism en masse at that point, but it did live on. It lived on in the minds of the people at Columbia, in the halls of academia, as they call it, and it lived on actually in an organization still called Technocracy Incorporated. They're still alive. They have a little office up in North Washington State, and I've been there and talked with them.
I've read their educational book. They've got a learning manual if you wanted to learn about it.
Oh yeah, They were nice enough. I enjoyed talking to them actually, and I told them they really were. And they
Are
didn't
they
agree.
normal people, just like you and me, and they just have this belief that
Well, the people, here's the deal again. The people that were the original technocrats were a lot like the original Greens, the environmentalists from the 1950s, 60s.
Mhm.
They had a view of what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. Now, there's a lot of the original environmental movement I don't agree with, and there's a lot of original technocracy I don't agree with, but their movements were hijacked, literally hijacked by the global elite. That's what happened with the environmental movement. And that young lady from Nairobi, you get a flavor of that. She was one of the original Greens. If she was around today, she'd still be spitting nails at these people, I can tell you. But this is what happened. Their legitimate ideology, if you will, got hijacked by the global elite to use it for their own purposes, which were not the same purposes that the original people had.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing with technocracy that happened. They never saw it. I argued with these people up there, said, how do you feel about technocracy being taken over by Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller and blah, blah, blah? Oh, that never happened. That hasn't happened. There's nothing like that. Blah.
That's a conspiracy.
And they just couldn't grasp it. And it's only because their minds were still so narrowly focused on the past, they couldn't see what was happening right now in the present.
That's kind of like what's going on in America. People are so stuck in the past, they're not focused on what's going on right now that's going to impact the future.
That's right. Exactly right. So anyway, that's how technocracy kind of came forward.
Yeah.
Zbigniew Brzezinski was at Columbia University when he wrote his book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And back when I wrote with Anthony Sutton in the 70s on the Trilateral Commission, we had no idea that historic technocracy ever existed. We didn't know anything about it. So we didn't have anything to compare to. But when I went back and read Brzezinski's book, remember the subtitle again, America's Role in the Technotronic Era, the first question I had immediately was, could he have been talking about technocracy when he said technotronic?
Mm-hmm.
I went back and I read the book again, and sure enough, all the stuff he talks about just kind of fit hand in glove with what original technocracy wanted to do. David Rockefeller saw that, fell in love with Brzezinski, and said, come with me. We're going to a Bilderberg meeting, that was 1972. Rockefeller bounced it off his buddies over there and said, what do you think about forming an organization called the Trilateral Commission? We'll get people together from Europe and Japan and all that kind of stuff. And we'll use it to foster a new international economic order. That's what he said. Well, they said, man, go for it, Rock. Go get it. I find you, basically. That's my paraphrase. I don't know.
I love it. You're always making me laugh, Patrick.
So they come back to the U.S. in early 1973. They start the Trilateral Commission. They get the first, couple hundred members from around these three nations. Mm-hmm. And off to the races they go. Rockefeller, remember, had a very tight relationship with the United Nations all before it. Rockefeller family actually donated the land to the UN where it stands today. Talk about expensive real estate. But they did, and they've had a very close relationship, given extra money to the UN forever. Mm-hmm. So but not surprisingly, in 1974, the United Nations passed a resolution in the General Assembly for the creation of a new international economic order. 1 year after the Trilateral Commission was started. They got them in it from day one. You can see them prodding the UN, trying to get the wagon headed in the right direction, even 1 year, actually it's less than a year from the time the Trilateral Commission was founded. So the Trilateral Commission went along one way, and over here was, the big monolithic structure of the United Nations which touched all the other nations of the world, not just Japan and Europe and us. And the rest is kind of history. But these people hijacked technocracy essentially. They didn't change it much, but they hijacked it and they said, you know, this is the way that we can get control over all the resources of the world. That's it.
It's so funny, you know, I just thought of this whilst you were talking. It's kind of a different topic, but that same deception that Rock did with the Trilateral Commission and the UN, it's the same sort of deception that you see in the Federal Reserve System, you know, in the money system. I believe Rockefeller was behind that as well. And they kind of pulled the wool over our eyes with the money system in the same way they pulled our eyes over this. And it's like, wow, you start to unpeel this and you see there's just kind of one small group running the show on all these things.
I put a little story into my book. Tell you what.
So this is page 55 of The Hard Road to World Order.
That's correct. Yeah, it should be on page 55.
Okay.
The story goes like this. Dr. William Livingston, Levin, not Livingston, Livingston, was actually an itinerant salesman with a phony name who created a concoction of oil and laxative and branded it as a cure for cancer. Since cancer was a dreaded, and this is back in the 1800s, branded as since cancer was a dreaded and usually fatal disease, people would buy and try literally anything for a cure. He would explain that if his miracle cure was strong enough to beat cancer, it probably would beat a whole lot of other diseases as well. When William came to a new town, he would mesmerize and trick people into buying his miracle cure. As soon as anyone questioned his phony operation, he would ride out much faster than he'd originally arrived. Really, William was indeed a fraud and a con artist, but he somehow always managed to escape arrest or lynching. He died in 1906 at the ripe old age of 95. Earlier in life, he reportedly bragged, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make them far." However, Livingston's name was indeed a fraud. His real name was William Avery Rockefeller Sr. And one of those sharp sons was John D. Rockefeller, who was soon to become the richest man in America and the grandfather of David A. Rockefeller, founder of the Trilateral Commission in 1973. The entire fraud being perpetrated by the United Nations with its deep roots into the Rockefeller family and with this modern genesis in the Trilateral Commission and Technocracy, of Rockefeller's snake oil legacy dating all the way up the family tree into the 1800s. The structure of today's con is the same, even if the scale of it is far greater. Utopia is yours if you simply give up control over all your production and consumption, i.e. the entire economy of the world. People are just as gullible today as they were back then. Now, it is interesting. This story is absolutely gospel truth true about William Livingston, whose name was not, he was a con artist. And William Avery Rockefeller was his real name. This family has been crooked for 150 years.
Whoa.
I'm talking crooked.
Thank you for saying that.
There's nothing different today that they're doing than they did back then. It's just now they have all this money behind them. And they're offering the same kind of utopian snake oil today that he offered back then with this cancer cure.
Yeah.
That was utopia to those people. Curing cancer, I mean, you got cancer, you're dead.
That's right.
There's no treatment.
That's right. And today, the cure for cancer is really the access to technology. I mean, technology is a huge part of our life, and he seems to be involved in this. Any sector that comes up that's important, whether it's the medical or the banking or the global politics or the technology, I mean, they've got their fingers in all the pies.
Well, they do. And the Rockefeller family and others surrounding it have always been resource sensitive. And by that I mean when John D was in the oil business, oil was a resource. That's all it was. It was a resource. So he bought up massive amounts of real estate. He bought up mineral rights all over the place to drill oil wells and to transport that oil and sell it to whoever, countries and stuff around the world. It was a resource. But they had other interests in resources as well, not just oil. They've always known that wealth is in the resources. It's not in the money it generates. It's in the resources itself. Go back in the Old Testament and read the story of Job. Job was a rich man because he had thousands and thousands of cattle, thousands of sheep. He had timber reserves. He had gold mines. He had silver mines. The resources of the land made Job a wealthy man. The fact that money was involved was just secondary, okay? They knew this. The Rockefellers have always relied on this principle: get the resources. But the way they've done it in the past is with the money. And indeed, the Federal Reserve now was set up in 1913. We're now 100 years beyond that. The Federal Reserve has chiseled off, if you will, some 98.5% of the value of the dollar from 1913. What's left to chisel, for Pete's sake? There's nothing left that's worth anything to chisel it off. If you're not a billionaire today, you're nothing.
Yeah.
10 years from now, it's going to be if you're not a trillionaire, you're nothing. So money is gone. But in the meantime, when sustainable development was invented, when they saw the technocracy doctrine to drive out private property and scare it, force it into the hands of the global elite, that was like ringing a dinner bell to these people. Wow, we get this. That's when they started. And ever since then, this is exactly what we've seen happen. The resources of the world have been driven into the hands of the United Nations, quote unquote, in sort of a global common trust that is run by them, by the global elite. You and I will never see those resources. But every time somebody sets up a heritage zone or a wilderness zone or a wildlife preserve or whatever around the world, you're looking straight at it. They're taking resources out. In fact, this is just an amazing thing. It's only a couple of years old now. The United Nations invented a debt for land swap with countries who have been buried in debt, mostly in Africa and South America. So how'd this play out? Well, who got these countries in debt in the first place? Them. It was the World Bank. It was the IMF, whatever. They buried these countries in debt to the point they could never, ever, ever, ever get out of debt. No matter what they did, they could not get out of debt, and it kept them impoverished. So now the United Nations and the world, through the World Bank, IMF, are going back to these very same countries, saying, look, we see that you're in trouble. We know you're never going to get out of debt, and we know we'd like to help you, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We will, if you give us this land over here, you got this really nice wilderness area over here, you put this land under United Nations Heritage Zone. That means you can't touch it anymore. It just has to sit there. You give that land to let us make it a heritage zone, and we will waive your interest on the debt you own or that you owe. In some cases, they're forgiving some of the debt. This is just another way to rape the people one more time against their will.
And people don't know this, but this is happening inside the country. Like, I think Yellowstone National Park, and I don't know that fact at all, but I know that there's huge parks and there's reservoirs that are being taken away. And, the common person that lives in the city is not seeing any of this, but it's actually happening right now, and it's getting worse.
That's right. If people would go on to like Google right now and search for government land ownership in America, what they will find is a map of the ownership of the land that our government owns around the country. They own today over 650 million acres of land. Now, there's only 2.27 billion acres in America. So that means they own about 30% landmass of America. Why does the federal government need to own 30% of the landmass of America? Will you and I ever see 1 acre of that land? Never. Not in 1,000 years will we ever see it, much less enjoy it. It's been locked up. And in that, most of that land is in the west of the Rockies, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, and so on. This is where the massive wealth of our nation exists. Massive. We have timber, we have oil and gas coming out our ears, we have uranium mines, we have gold mines, we have the silver capital of the world up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's incredible. We have water. And this is not by mistake, and it's not for the benefit of the American people. They have sequestered this land according to Agenda 21 doctrine that's been in place now since 1992, and that's when land acquisition really got underway in America in earnest. Bill Clinton nationalized stuff all over the place.
You know, we're seeing that in Australia too, Patrick. I didn't know we were going to get into this topic, but I have a little story to share, just a quick one in regards to this exact situation. I was at a farm, and we've had a huge drought over here in Australia. And I was talking about the horses that have been affected by the drought. And one of the horses was a huge show horse that would normally sell for $200,000. And because of the drought, and because there's no food and water and blah blah blah, the horses were suffering, and they had to be sold. And one of the horses was sold for $500, and was struggling to drink water and to eat because there's a huge drought. And so I was talking to the cowboy that was taking us on a little tour, and I asked him if he knew that there was water underneath the surface, because we've got endless amounts of water underneath the crust of the ocean, from what I understand. And when he agreed, he said, yeah, well, we do have water under the ground. And I asked, well, why can't you mine that water and help the horses? He said, the government won't let you. And if the government sees that you've mined for water, not only will they charge you $200,000 as a fine, but they'll charge the farmer whose land that you're mining $2 million. So we can't access this water. It's not ours to access.
You're absolutely right. This is happening. The water grab is going on all around the world today. This is not an uncommon thing. It's happening in the States as well, almost in the same manner. And it's interesting, people scratch their head over this, say this is just too big. So big. How can it possibly be true? There was a movie, I think it was one of the first James Bond movies. I don't know if you're a Bond fan.
Oh, yeah.
There was a James Bond movie called Goldfinger. And the principle, the main plot of Goldfinger was, he was the evil guy, right? He was a bad one. And he was going to place an atomic device, explosive device, in the Fort Knox, where all the gold is stored. He wasn't going to rob it. In the end, they found this out. Initially, they thought, he's going to rob Fort Knox. But his idea was to plant a nuclear device in Fort Knox and blow it up and irradiate all the gold in Fort Knox. And in the meantime, he'd gone out in the commercial market and bought up buku amounts of gold, just in the free market. He went out and bought it from gold dealers and stuff, and bullion banks. So he had all his private gold stashed out here, which he bought at a price. Say he bought it at, I don't know, whatever, $50 an ounce or $100 an ounce. And now all of a sudden, if he's successful and he blows up Fort Knox and irradiates all the gold, that means people can't touch it. Right? Can't use it. It's not useful for gold anymore. It's just completely off limits. Well, his theory was that will make my store worth 1,000 times more than it was the day before it went off. Okay, made perfect sense to me. And it did. I mean, that was the plot of the movie. It's a great plot. So, and James Bond saved the day. You know that. So, you know, he didn't pull it off. But here's the thing. Tell me what happens to a legitimate water well, or to a lake, or whatever, some kind of water somewhere. If all the water around has been taken off limits, like you can't drill there, or you'll get a huge fine, you better not do it. That makes all the other water just that much more valuable, doesn't it? So who controls that other water? This is not a hard trail to find. Follow the money here. Who controls that other water that is available? And you will find almost every time some rat is playing the system, like Goldfinger did, to get his value go up, and everybody else go.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have the same situation in the energy sector.
Exactly the same. Yeah. Yeah. Same game.
Okay. So now we know the scope of this. How does...
Let me say this about the energy game, okay?
Yes.
There's plenty of oil and gas in the world. We all know that. There's tons of it everywhere. And a lot of people have proven now, I believe, that the so-called abiotic oil means that the earth is still producing oil even today, more reserves under the ground. There's plenty of energy. But what has happened here, there's no way that you could irradiate that oil in the ground. It's in the ground. You know, you can't do anything in the ground to spoil that oil. It can't get down 5,000 feet and do anything to it. What they've done through global warming hysteria is that they've convinced people that drilling for oil and gas and coal or whatever other fossil fuel is out there is evil and it must be stopped. So they're playing with people's minds to convince them that those resources are off limits. You can't touch them. But we have a deal for you. We have alternative energy over here. We have windmills. We have solar panels. We have, you name it. They got it.
Choice.
We got a deal for you. It reminds me of a snake oil salesman from the 1800s.
There you go. Always connecting the dots there, Patrick.
They connect themselves, Sheena. There's no effort involved here. It just keeps connecting itself.
Yeah. Okay, so now we see the lay of the land, and we got a pretty good idea about technocracy in the last interview. That, you know, all eyes are on us. We've got cameras in every street. They're looking at, you know, people, and they're monitoring people, and we haven't even begun to hit the iceberg of what's expected in the next couple of years. And I want to talk a little bit about the time frame, but I also want to get a little bit more into the new book. Like, what other things did you uncover besides, well, you already uncovered so much in Technocracy Rising. What else is there to uncover?
My effort was not to examine all the nuts and bolts of technocracy in this latest book. My goal was to give people more current examples of what's going on today, which I did a little bit in Technocracy Rising, but there was so much to say just to document what is it. So I had to spend a lot of time and space to do that. This book deals more with the practical side of technocracy. It deals with Fintech, that is financial technology. How are they going to finance sustainable development technocracy? It deals with global cities and how are global cities going to replace the nation state, and how are global cities going to be connected with each other to kind of, if you will, perfect the global supply chain, which is precious in their eyes. These are things that are not difficult to understand, but if that's not your specialty, you never have any exposure to it at all. So I tried to give people enough of a grounding so that they can understand. Excuse me, I had a cough button. So they could kind of understand what the practical effect of sustainable development is. I talk a lot about surveillance in this book. That's a big thing right now, about the Internet of Things, about smart cities. This is where people live with these things, right? We have an initiative here in Phoenix. It's the first in the nation, I think the world, called Smart Region Initiative. And it's a regional governance setup again where a group of people, including ASU, are getting together. It's all NGO stuff, no government involved. And they're trying to assert authority over our 4.2 million people in this area, in our 22 cities. They're trying to usurp authority and impress upon us in a uniform way their implementation of smart city technology. Sensors everywhere, cameras, sensors, license plate readers. Yeah, I mean, you name it, the whole enchilada. So, you know, smart city technology is a big thing today that Americans, at least, don't really grasp what's going on. So anyway, that's what this book is about. And it's a little bit easier to read as a result than the first one. You don't quite have to think so hard to internalize what I said. But so far, it's gotten really good reviews. In fact, I think on Amazon, I think they're all 5-star at this point.
I'm sure.
Somebody's getting it, you know. And I haven't had any detractors come after me yet. But if there was one thing we needed to talk about to lead into to this book, it would probably be 5G.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're talking.
And yeah, a lot of people are concerned about 5G, mostly for the wrong reasons. But they're concerned about it. I'm glad they're concerned at all.
So you're saying the wrong reasons are the health reasons?
This may be an effective monkey wrench in some instances to get city councils and stuff to back off on 5G. But the decision has been made from the top down that 5G is going to be implemented, whether there's any medical thing or not.
Okay.
My guess is there will be more definitive proof come out as more studies are done and applied to 5G. They haven't been done yet. I would agree with the concept of use caution first. You know, let's test it first and then maybe. But we can't trust these people to do legitimate testing. That's the problem. They do testing and they bury the results, just like the cigarette companies did. They knew what was happening, but any study that came along that proved it, they got a hold of it and deep sixed it out in the middle of the Nevada desert. So you never find it. So,
and on that note, Patrick, it's almost like the studies need to study the right things and not the wrong things. Like, does your cell phone heat up in your hand, or does your cell phone cause you cancer? We want to know if our cell phones cause cancer. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be studying.
That's right. The right questions need to be asked. But let me tell you, the great danger right now is not health. The great danger is that 5G is intended to be used to light up the Internet of Things all around the world. Most people have never heard of the Internet of Things before. But this is where devices talk to other devices. Sensors talk to central computers. Cars talk to each other. Smart meters talk to each other, and they talk to the utility and the whoever the data aggregator is. facial.
Diapers are telling parents when the babies have gone pee and poo.
That's right. Your refrigerator talking to you and the grocery store to tell you when you're out of an item that you usually keep in stock. The Internet of Things is what's being used in China today to control their population. And it is draconian. If you've looked at China, I know you have, it's absolutely draconian what's happening in China. So the people that are promoting 5G, the AT&Ts of the world, Verizon, T-Mobile, the big ones, Ericsson, some of the big phone companies, NVIDIA, what they're talking about is not just speeding up your cell phone, right? It will, but that's not the point. They could care less about your cell phone. What they're talking about, and these interviews, speeches are all on YouTube too, by the way. They're out there. You listen to these guys speak, they all talk about the Internet of Things and smart cities. That's where the big payola is for them. And if 5G is successful, it will result in putting an electronic manacle around every citizen's neck that lives in a smart city. I mean, I don't want somebody to get cancer. I really don't. But the greater picture here is we will all be enslaved if the wrong people get their hands on this. At this point, it seems like the wrong people are in charge of it right now. And I don't know how the wrong people couldn't possibly get their hands on it as they move forward.
Right. I just wanted to echo what you're saying, Patrick, because I used to be in the technology space. I dropped out, as you might know, but one of the things that I was very quick to realize is this is not pie in the sky. They're actually now talking about the Internet of everything. It's no longer the Internet of Things. It's the Internet of everything. And it is being rolled out very quickly. I've gone to conventions. I've seen it front and center that they're promoting this like it's the next best thing to sliced bread. And again, I say this quite a lot on the show. That could not be furthest from the truth. So, so can we talk a little bit about when you say, it's not just about the health, because I get that too. And I've always had kind of internal confrontation about which angle I go on this issue, because the health issue is kind of low-hanging fruit. People will get that this is, causing cancer. It's the bit that you're talking about, the layer above that people can't even grasp. Oh, we're not China. This is not going to happen in the U.S. But it's actually so close to reality that people don't even understand the changes that are going to come in the future. So can we talk a little bit more about that, how it's going to hold us down electronically, I guess, and from the social credit standpoint as well? That's going to be a big play in this.
We can look at China as an example.
Yeah.
I believe. China was declared to be a technocracy as early as the year 2000 by Time magazine, no less. They have demonstrated very adequately, in my mind, that they are no longer a communist dictatorship. They are a technocracy. They're a fully engineered society. And they're using this technology to engineer their society. You talk about 600 million facial recognition cameras that are going to be installed by next year in China. That's one camera for every 2.5 people, all tied back into artificial intelligence algorithms for identification. What's this all about? Do they need 600 million cameras? For us, that would be about 100.25 million cameras in our country. We don't need that many cameras, but they're growing here. China's using the social credit score to rank and file, if you will, all the citizens in the country to find out which ones are good little citizens and which ones are not reliable, not trustworthy. You get a jaywalking ticket too many times and too frequently, your score goes down. You smoke, your score goes down. You do bad posts against the government, you go down and it might disappear.
Right.
A few people have. But they have the ability in China right now to literally cut somebody out of the system altogether if they wanted to. All by artificial intelligence programs. China has sworn they're going to lead in 5G. They have sworn they're going to lead in artificial intelligence. Right now they are on both fronts. And when I say China is the poster child for global technocracy, we need to take a minute and go back and find out, where did China come from?
Going back to the same name again, aren't we?
What's China doing here? How did they get to the table? And how did they figure this out to become a technocracy?
Tell us. Why don't you tell us, Patrick? You know.
I'm sorry. Too much suspense here. In 1970, China was still isolated in the world. Eventually, the bamboo curtain would have fallen, just like it did in the Iron Curtain did in Russia and Germany. But China was isolated under great pressure to change. They had horrible abuses of human rights, torturing people, killing people. China killed more people in the last century than any other country in the world, and it was their own citizens they killed. They didn't have wars, they killed their own citizens. So China was in isolation. In early 1971, when Richard Nixon was president, his Secretary of State was Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was a founding member a couple years later in the Trilateral Commission.
Was he Rock's best friend? Did he hang around those same circles?
Oh yeah, he's a Rockefeller guy.
Yeah.
He was very close to Rockefeller. So was Nixon, by the way. But Kissinger took an illegal trip to China, which was illegal. Our Congress had a law in place that nobody could travel to China because they were our enemy, and you could not aid and abet the enemy. It's just absolutely off limits. Well, Kissinger made the trip anyway. And he started the thaw of relations with China with that first trip. By 1976, Zbigniew Brzezinski became the point man for bringing China back onto the global stage. And history books, political science history books, that I didn't write them, legitimate history books will tell you that it was Zbigniew Brzezinski's major accomplishment during the Jimmy Carter administration to bring China back into the global stage as a partner. There was a stampede thereafter of Western companies to supply technology to China to build up their infrastructure first, and then to begin to transfer factories, build factories over there to build things. That started the stampede of American businesses to go to China, to drop their plants here, set up new plants in China. Of course, America lost, I don't know how many millions of jobs over the period of time, but it was horrible.
Right.
President Bush is talking about getting those companies back. Well, some are coming back, I suppose, but we're talking about the history of it. Brzezinski, of course, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Most of the people that went to China to build up their infrastructure were connected to the Trilateral Commission in one form or another. I'll give you just one example. Bechtel Engineering, private company in San Francisco, the largest engineering company in the world. They're huge, largest in the world. The chairman of Bechtel at the time, Caspar Weinberger, was a founding member of the Trilateral Commission. Somehow, Bechtel got a free pass to go to China before it was legal to go to China, which Brzezinski did later in '76. Mm-hmm. Bechtel Engineering had already completed 18 major infrastructure projects in China before it became technically legal for any American even to be in China. Mm-hmm. Never brought to the media, never had any questioning by the Congress or anybody else. They just did it. They made billions of dollars off of it, by the way. So you see a stampede of companies like IBM, like Caterpillar tractor made out like a bandit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the infrastructure is important to get trade going in a country. So they did that. They supplied the technology for China to do almost everything it's done ever since. Mm-hmm. And what China could not get legitimately from the West, it stole. It simply stole it from us because we brought them over here to be educated in our universities. Mm-hmm. A lot of them stayed. A lot of them became spies for China. Mm-hmm. They stole technology left and right, and now it's all over the media today. Mm-hmm. That China has been, turns out, China has been the, what do you call it, the obsessive compulsive thief mm-hmm. to steal us blind. So China is a product of Western innovation, and not just Western innovation at large, but the Trilateral Commission in specific.
Right, right.
Why would they not become a technocracy if that is what they were pushing? Yeah. Of course, to me, this validates the fact that what I'm saying about everything else that's happening in our country is absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. They could have fed them democracy, for instance. Mm-hmm. Anything. They could have given them anything they wanted to. Mm-hmm. They could have given them fascism. They could have given whatever. They didn't. They gave them technocracy and said, this is the way to go. And they went, and here they are, the largest of 1.4 billion people, is a lot of people. They are now exporting their technology of oppression, suppression, whatever, technocracy, mm-hmm. all over the planet to anybody who will buy it.
Wow. It's, go on, sorry.
Oh, it's how it's spreading.
Yeah, it's funny because a couple of things here. The deception that we see as we befriend China is the same deception that we see in the banking industry. And I mean, it's the same kind of, secrecy and, anyways, just wanted to point that out. Oh, it seems like the same ploy, just different scenario. I wanted to actually ask, so did we ever get to the bottom of why we're friends with China now? Because we were at one point not allowed, it was treasonous if we went over there and, met with the presidents and so forth. And since then, somehow that's changed. And not only are we engaging with China, but the Trilateral Commission is promoting China. Like, they're promoting them as the up and coming best, country in the world. And these are our presidents. These are our people that identify with the Trilateral Commission. They're fully promoting these people now. And so when did that switch happen? And what's the official narrative? How did we become not allowed to be dealing with China to now we're best friends with them and we're rooting them along to be the leader in this new technocratic civilization?
This was the plan from the beginning. I can't see it any other way.